So our next step is to work on the UserEdit.Vue component. And of course, this is a component that will have a form that's either empty when we're adding a user or pre-populated with data for an existing user. And it will allow us to add or edit a user. Now there's a fair bit of work required to implement this, but none of it is new. Everything we're going to do, you've already seen at one point or another. So in this component, I'm going to have to import a few things. I know I'm going to be using, for example, the form tag component. So I'll import form tag from /form/form tag. Okay? And I know I'm also going to be using the text input. So I'll import text input from /form/text input. And I'll probably be making alerts of some sort, so I may as well import noti from noti. Okay? So we're definitely going to need those, and of course we'll need security. So let's import security from /security.js. Okay, now we need to use these or we'll get an error. So let's get started. Down here in the before mount lifecycle part of the export default, I'm going to make a check. And what I'm going to check is to see when this route is called, the last bit, if you look at index.js from our router package, when I'm editing a user, it's right here. The path will be /admin/users and then some user ID. And if that user ID is a positive integer, then I'm actually going to be editing an existing user. But if it's 0, then I'm going to be adding a user. So we need to have some means of determining what that parameter is, that last parameter. And fortunately, Vue makes that pretty easy. I'll put an if statement here. And I'm going to say if, and I'm going to use JavaScript's parseInt, just to make sure that it's an integer. If parseInt, and then I'm going to be parsing a string, so I'll cast it to a string. And what I'm getting is the actual last part of that URL. This dot, and then I use the magic keyword $root, that is part of Vue itself, root.params dot, and then I have to match exactly what I have in my roots file. And I used user ID, so I'll copy that and come back here and paste it in. And then, just to be absolutely sure that it's being converted to base 10, I'll put a 10 in there. If that's greater than 0, I think I have one extra parentheses here. Yeah, there we go. Then I'm going to be editing an existing user. I'm going to leave that one alone, and I'm going to do adding a user first. Okay? So I'll just put a to-do get user from database. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is add a data function, and that will return a user, okay, with an ID, which is initially set to 0, first_name, which is initially set to an empty string, last_name, which is initially an empty string, email, which is an empty string, and password, which is also an empty string. And we're also going to have some components, so we'll say components. And for sure, we're going to have at least these ones. So we're going to have form tag, and I'll say when I use that, I'm going to use form tag, just to explicitly declare what I'm using, and that is linked to form tag. And we're also going to have text-input. And that's linked to text input. We're also going to have some methods, at least one, probably more than one. So let's put in methods here. And the first one, of course, will be, and let me give myself some room, submit handler. Submit handler. And we'll just leave it empty for the moment. Okay, so there's the good start, at least, on what we're going to be doing. So over here, when this component is loaded, before it mounts, we'll make sure the user is allowed to be here by calling security.requireToken. Then we check to see if the last part of the URL is a positive integer. If it is, we're going to go and get a user from the database. And if it's not, we'll just leave the data alone here, the user data, in our data function, in other words, the state for this particular component, we'll leave those all to empty. So of course now we need to come up here and actually build a form. So after the h1 tag, I'll put in an HR just to separate things, and then I'll use my form dash tag. So form tag, and when this form is submitted, of course, we want to fire off an event instead of submitting the form. So UserEdit event. That'll be the name of the event that I send out when this is submitted. And that's going to call submit handler. Okay? And the name of this is, say, user form. And the event we're going to fire off, it has to be exactly the same as what I have at the beginning, UserEdit event. So there's my opening form tag, and I'll have my closing form tag. And now we just have a few text inputs, and there's nothing magical about these. So I'll have a text input, and I'll put it this way so it's easier to read. We'll model this, v-model, we'll bind it to user.firstname. Okay? And the type is text. And we'll say required is true. And we'll give it a label. And its value will be bound to, value is equal to user.first_name. And the name for everything is equal to first-name. Okay? And then we close our text input. So that's our first name, so let's copy it and paste it for last name. And this one will be last name. And then I'll copy that and paste it here and change this to last-name and change this to last. Okay, then I'll copy the whole thing again. So that's first name and last name. The next thing we need to worry about is the email address. So I'll paste that in there. And call this, the v-model is bound to user.email. The type will be email in this case. Required is true. The label is email. The value is user.email. And the name is just email. And the last one is password. So I'll copy this, because I'm not sure what's on my clipboard anymore, and paste it in and change this to password. Now this one's a little bit different, okay? Basically, when I'm adding a user, I want the password to be a required field. But when I'm editing a user, I can't actually put in the pre-existing password because I don't know what the user's password is. I know what the hash of the password is, and I know that's stored in the database. So what I really need to do is to display one version of this text input for the password for a new user and a different version for the existing users. So of course we're going to be using v-if and v-else. So let's come up here and we'll say first of all v-if this.user.id is exactly equal to 0. Okay? In that condition, this will be displayed. So let's finish this up. This will be bound to user.password. The type is password. And for user ID of 0, when I'm adding a user, it does have to be required, so I'll leave that alone. And the label will be password. And the value will be user.password. And the name will be password. Then I'll copy this whole thing and paste it below here and change this to v-else. So this is the version of the input for password that will be used for existing users that we're trying to edit. Okay? So v-model is still user.password. Type is still password. And I can just leave required out entirely because that defaults to false. The label is still password. The value is still user.password. And the name is password. And that should do it for that. Okay? Now let's put an HR here at the end of this. And I'm not sure if this will compile properly yet. Let's have a look. So we've imported security. It's already been declared. So I got a typo here somewhere. Let's find that. I imported security twice. That'll explain that. Let's see if it compiles now. And it fails because noti is defined but never used. So I'll just comment this line out for now. Try that. There, it's running. Let's go see what our form looks like then, okay? So I'll go back to my web browser. And I'll go to admin and say add a user. There it is. Okay, so there's our form. And we're coming along here. So the next thing to do, of course, is to go and add a button at the bottom that allows us to submit the form. Add a button to cancel that will take us back to the list of all users. And of course, to write the logic for actually posting a user to the back end. And then we'll need a handler on the back end that accepts that post. And we'll get started on that sort of thing in the next lecture.